Welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance. I'm Damien. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damien. How's everything back in Mexico?
Well, it's Thursday of Holy Week, so Mexico City at least is pretty empty, but I'm here, and our podcast goes on, whether it's a holiday or not.
That's good.
So this week we have a great interview with Ruben Mugartegui. Ruben is the managing director of Amazon Web Services, AWS Mexico. He runs AWS here, and AWS is actually celebrating its 20th anniversary. And he's going to talk about how AWS sort of drove Mexico and the world's shift to cloud computing, and how it's now positioning itself at the center of Mexico's AI transition, among other things, investing billions of dollars in new data centers that are key to the AI transition. And he is, without any question, an AI optimist, thinks soon cancer will be cured. Anyway, listen to the podcast to the end and you'll hear his views. And then I think Eduardo will talk about the Economist article about Mexico's weak economic growth, Mexico's so-called broken economy, and the finance ministry's sort of response to that. I think we'll chat about Park Life IPO, a micro IPO. Park Life is a residential real estate company, first ever. And then got some interesting reports on Mexico's e-commerce sector from the E-commerce Association. And then Nissan, sadly, finally closed its CIVAC plant in Morelos. So why don't we kick off, Eduardo, with the Economist, Mexico's broken economy. I'm sure you've seen the debate. The Economist came out just over a week ago now, or a week ago. Then Jorge Castaneda, the former foreign minister, waded in. Then Viri Rios waded in. Then the finance ministry waded in. And then I've seen on Google a bunch of other people opining on it. So now it's our chance at the very end to wade in. So what's your...
We don't have much to that now. Everybody from the right and the left and the center, everybody's talked about it. And everybody's been very critical of the Economist. I mean, to be honest, the Mexican economy is not doing well. There's no doubt about that. And I think the reasons the Economist might have brought up in its article might not be perfectly academically in tune with the latest paper that somebody has done on whether wages are influencing productivity or not. But overall, I think the sense is that Mexico has an issue with its growth levels, and by raising the issue, I think it's good. And the fact of the matter that the finance ministry itself put out a press release just dedicated on the article shows that they're sensitive, and I think they are sensitive because they're not. The economy is not performing as it should be, or as it could. And we also saw recently, yesterday, the criteria that will cover the budget for next year. The government is very optimistic about its growth prospects, while private investors or private analysts are much less optimistic about it. So there is a discrepancy between how the private sectors view what Mexico is right now, and where the government stands overall on its prospects. My sense is that, unfortunately, this administration is not willing to listen sometimes to the concerns that the private sector has raised about, more than anything, the uncertainty that they feel they have when they want to invest in Mexico for several reasons, be it the judicial reform, be it the incapacity of the administration to notice or to acknowledge that its own state-owned companies are not doing well, that they need help, that that sector needs to be thought of all over. It's been 9 decades since Mexico expropriated its oil industry. It's not working. We have also a pipe leak apparently in the Gulf of Mexico. Pemex has a very bad track record. So to me, I hope that whatever the outcome of this debate is, that the parts get closer and fixed some of the issues that they have, so that the economy could grow again as it should be and as I think it can.
Right. I mean, as I see it, the Economist basically sort of summarized the reasons for Mexico's structurally low growth. Mexico's grown over any time frame you care to choose, less fast than Brazil or Turkey, and less fast than the US for that matter. They divide into two factors. One is kind of investment has been undermined by government policy, by specifically crime, the judicial reform, and energy policy, and kind of poor public sector kind of investment projects like the Tren Maya or the AIFA and so on. And then secondly, informality, which is more of a sort of substantive issue, which is very much taking Santiago Levy's argument, which is that there's this big gap between hiring people in the formal sector and the informal sector, driven by Social Security for the most part, and taxation in general. And companies prefer to pay less, and therefore they go into the informal economy. So what Levy has argued for some time is that there should be a universal sort of Social Security safety net financed out of consumption taxes for the most part, and that employment in the informal or formal sector should have access to those benefits, and then you would reduce that wedge of costs between the formal and informal. And his argument is that the very large informal sector in Mexico, it's about 55% of employment is in the informal sector, drives low productivity and low investment, because if you're in the informal sector, you don't really have access to credit. Banks aren't going to lend you money. If you don't have access to credit, you can't really invest. If you can't invest, you can't have fancy new machinery and more productive workers. So that's a sort of... Now, Castaneda, in his normal kind of acerbic way, said, el problema de fondo es la 4T, no la informalidad. And basically focuses entirely on the first area. On the informality, you have Viri Rios, who's obviously, close to the 4T, although she's an independent economist, and she makes kind of the argument that informality is the result of bad formal jobs, not the cause itself of low growth. And in her Substack, she quotes, to me at least, and people I know, fairly obscure kind of non-orthodox economist called Jaime Ross Bosch, as saying that he has proven this. Well, I actually took a look at his book, one of his books at least. I don't think you could argue that he's proven it. But anyway, I think that there's clearly it's clearly bidirectional. In other words, low informality, high informality reduces productivity, which causes low jobs, which causes more informality. So there's a vicious circle going on. It's impossible to say which of the two, but what you can say is that Mexico has low growth and has very high levels of informality. Her second argument is that informality has been coming down, so growth should be improving. Because what you want to look at is the rate of change in these things. And I think that's a bit misleading, because actually informality has hardly gone down. The rates, we're looking at 53, 54, 55. I mean, nothing that's meaningful to be able to make an argument of that nature. So I think that the political reality of abolishing Social Security linked to wages, basically so that companies don't have to pay for this social net and consumers do, means it's completely and utterly unrealistic. There's no chance whatsoever that Mexico is going to let companies off the hook and send that tax bill to consumers. So it's a nice idea, but it's not going to fly, and it's not realistic. But what you can do is say, don't make the situation worse by continuing to raise the gap between the cost of hiring people in the formal and informal sector. And in the end, the Moreno 4T policies have, in this respect at least, made things worse. The arbitrage between formal and informal employment costs has gone up. And so I think that some kind of policies to try and reduce that arbitrage would be helpful. And actually, Emilio Romano, who's the head of the ABM, the Bank Association, in the Cancun event that I went to a couple of weeks ago, in his speech did actually talk about this and said what we need is something similar to that we have for the income tax, which is sort of special lower Social Security contribution for small companies or companies joining the formal sector. So you have effectively a bifurcated kind of Social Security regime. But I think something along those lines needs to be done if you're going to grow formality. And then, of course, you need to digitalize payments. And the government can start leading by example, because right now, most of the social payments or the pension payments and student payments are paid to people in Banco de Bienestar, and then they take the money out as cash right away. So you could pay that money into debit cards and block a certain amount of cash outs and basically try to encourage a virtuous circle of digitalization of payments using the government, which is effectively the largest entity in Mexico, as an example of forcing digitalization. So there's lots of things you can do to improve formality. And I agree with you completely that the Economist article hit a nerve. So it went viral in the blogosphere, and that's good. And now we need to address kind of politically practical policies that address informality. I think Levy goes too far, although he's an academic economist. That's his job to go too far. I think it's up to the government and effectively, and I guess the electorate to push for policies that are politically practical and at the same time make the situation a bit better. Hacienda's response, I don't know if you got a chance to read the press release. I mean, they basically said, the downturn in 2025 was mostly cyclical, hangover from 2024, which was an electoral year. They didn't exactly say that, but they clearly implied that. And then the negative effect of Trump and Liberation Day, which we're celebrating the anniversary of, I think, today. And that hurt investment in, especially in the car sector. I mean, I think Hacienda, there's some element. Clearly was a cyclical element to the low growth last year, which was 0.8%. But, this year, I think most private sector economists are looking at growth between sort of 1.5% and 2% at this point. So it's not as if things are bouncing back. And over the last 5, 10, 15 years, growth, average growth has been below that of other emerging market peers like Brazil and Turkey, and not even thinking about the Asian countries, which have far outperformed Mexico. So I think they kind of missed a little bit of a trick in saying, but how they're going to address some of the more secular fundamental issues. And by blaming it on Trump, I think they also, as the Economist pointed out, failed to sort of say, well, actually exports grew by 8% last year. So Mexico was kind of a winner from Trump putting tariffs on every other country, apart from USMCA compliant goods, notwithstanding the importance of the car sector. So, it was clearly the rejigging of supply chains has been favorable to Mexico. It's a bit difficult to blame the low growth of on Trump. I mean, some people even argue, that Mexico would have grown it would have had even worse growth had Trump not slapped these big tariffs on China, for example.
Yeah, and the export and import sector in the latest numbers are very impressive. They're still growing at two-digit numbers. So yeah, the export sector is the only engine that is growing. So I think in that case it backfired because I think, like you said, Trump's overall policy helped Mexico in a way. The auto sector was hurt, and that's a big sector in Mexico without a doubt. But yeah, I mean, I think there are different structural problems with the Mexican economy. It's not just Cuatro T. I mean, we've had slow growth for many years. Now, I do get a sense that this administration is a little bit in denial of some of the things that worried capital markets or private enterprises, and they need to address them. They need to come a little bit more straightforward in acknowledging that these are concerns. We'll have to wait and see. I think they're very optimistic. I think the government is too optimistic. I mean, the economists like Alejandro Werner did say that the first year of each administration, things go down because they're learning how to deal with what they have in the drawers. They don't know what the drawers have inside the government. this administration had a much smoother transition than the previous ones, and still we saw a slowdown further than probably people anticipated, and we'll have to wait and see if they have the tools to make it grow again. It's not looking that promising, to be honest, but we'll have to wait.
Meanwhile, the finance ministers, you probably saw, put out their what they call their criterios, their sort of economic and budget forecasts for this year and next, which I kind of feel it's been slightly outdated, this criterios, because it's not binding on the budget. So, they put this out and then they decide what they want to do in December, depending on what's gone on between now and December. But I guess it's good to have some kind of long-term framework. Anyway, the growth for this year is 1.8 to 2.8% range. Next year, 1.9 to 2.9. I think for this year at least, especially given what's happened over the last month with the conflicts of Iran and the impact on the world economy and the US economy, I think most people will probably think that's too high, because that's a midpoint of 2.3. I don't think anyone or very few people are at 2.3 at this juncture. More relevantly, because it's a variable they largely control, is the so-called public sector borrowing requirement, the PSBR, or they're looking at a 4.1% deficit. That's basically the broadest definition of a budget deficit, falling to 3.5%. Now, again, they've proven too optimistic. So last year, they originally had a deficit under 4. According to them, it was at 4.3 in 2025. But actually, rating agencies like HR Ratings said that if you include all the sort of off-balance sheet stuff to Pemex, the real deficit, the real PSBR was about 4.8%. So there are also some definitional issues, but we'll see if they make that. But the latest talk about reducing YEPs to subsidize gasoline and especially diesel prices is suggestive that, there's some fiscal slippage is going to come in related to the hike in oil prices. And obviously, if the economy disappoints, then tax revenues will also disappoint. But if they do meet the targets, which we obviously hope they do, then it's probably going to be because infrastructure is going to be cut. And there's some stories today in the papers about how public sector investment is falling very sharply. And that's obviously going to affect growth. So they're kind of slightly caught between two invidious sort of objectives. One is meeting their budget targets and stabilizing debt to GDP, which has been growing recently. And the other is, promoting investment and helping the economy grow. And it seems, as things currently stand, they can't meet both those objectives at the same time.
It's very sad that exactly, to meet their fiscal goals, the first thing they cut is investment, and apparently last year they cut it by 45% public investment, and you can't grow the economy if you cut what makes the economy grow in the future. So they're right between rock and a hard place, and I don't see anyone in the government talking about how are we going to change this? How are we going to get out of this vicious circle or cycle of trying to meet our fiscal targets, but the only thing that we cut and that they can cut is investment. So it's gonna be tough. The popularity of the president is still pretty high in overall terms. I wonder whether they'll try to continue, because that's a very important thing for the midterm elections next year. But if the economy doesn't grow, they'll face some constraints later on with all their social programs that they have to finance.
Agreed. On the popularity, we're not here to talk about politics, but just a quick aside before moving on to the Life IPO. Bloomberg put out its own poll on Sheinbaum's popularity and had it at a 55%, way lower than El Financiero. It's a commission poll by a polling agency, so something for the political people in podcast to take a closer look at. Because everyone, it's almost like mantra now. You always say Sheinbaum's the most popular president in the world, and then suddenly, data point comes out that maybe questions that. Anyway, even at 55, she's well above Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of my country. So,
and Donald Trump, let's put it that way too.
Yeah, I think Donald's in his 30s right now.
Yeah.
And So Park Life IPO, it's first of all, it's a tiny IPO. In my experience, it's the smallest IPO ever to happen in Mexico. Maybe someone will put a comment that there's other ones. It's $15 million. Now, I actually think that's a good thing. It's a good thing that Mexico is open to small IPOs. It would be even better if if it was bigger, but I don't think there's anything bad in itself having small IPOs. And in the US, there's lots of these micro IPOs all the time, and it's a great way to finance investment and therefore growth. It's a great way to formalize the economy because you're audited and pay your taxes if you're on the stock market. And Mexico passed a capital markets law last year to allow for a sort of easier regulatory process to do these small IPOs, so precisely to help capital formation, and obviously equity capital is risk capital, so it's easier to invest when you don't have a fixed kind of coupon to meet. So I think it's great we have a small IPO. The other thing about it is it's the first ever residential real estate listed company in Mexico. There've been a couple of previous attempts, but this never happened before. There are lots of FIBRAs or REITs in Mexico on the industrial side. There's all the industrial parks. There's lots on the commercial side, shopping centers, and there's lots on the office side, obviously. But this is the first on the residential side. And the idea is basically Park Life has three kind of brands. Park Life, a brand itself, luxury apartments with premium amenities and sort of fancy gyms, saunas, massages, kind of things you would like as well. And then City Life, which is more kind of mid-market, urban apartments close to offices, malls, universities, and then Town Life, which are horizontal communities with sort of clubhouses. So that's the chairman or the head of the technical committee is Gustavo Tomé. He is, I think, the chairman of FIBRA Plus, which is a mixed real estate FIBRA across commercial and office and industrial parks. He also, with a shareholder group, helped lead to a change in control at Norte 19 or Hoteles City Express, and FIBRA Plus basically took over FIBRA H. So he's the kind of rising star or top dog in the real estate space, and become very prominent. And their goal is to do a subsequent offering, so basically get the thing listed with a small deal, because right now they only have 4 properties with 287 units and roughly 20,000 square meters, mainly in Mexico City, Polanco, Condesa, Santa Fe, and Querétaro. But their goal is to go up to 18 properties, raise another $150 million, diversify geographically outside Mexico City and Querétaro, and grow in both vertical and horizontal apartments. Now, I think it's quite, there's a reason why residential has been sort of, so far until this very, very small deal, being off limits to the stock market. You have a lot of, by definition, you have very fragmented tenant base. So, in industrial, you can, deal with General Motors and pick up a, $20 million check every quarter, where here you're dealing with, tens of thousands of sort of 20,000 peso a month checks. So it's a much more difficult. Secondly, it's much more difficult to get rid of people when they live in their home. So the legal system is less clear or less favorable, let's say, when you're talking about residential than when it's commercial or industrial. Thirdly, and it's not theoretical because we've heard talk about this, there's the issue of rent controls, especially in Mexico City with the whole gentrification debate. So that presumably is a fear. Probably these kind of properties don't seem as if they're going to be will never be subject to that kind of thing. They're sort of new fancy properties with gyms in sort of places like Nuevo Polanco, but it's still a threat. If it can happen in New York, it can happen in Mexico. And then fourthly, a lot of private individuals, as we know, Eduardo, kind of buy apartments as their form of saving, and they buy them even though the yields are quite low. And that depresses the overall yield in residential versus the yield in industrial or commercial. So often places like Polanco, the residential yield is as low as 3%. Very expensive apartments with quite low rents. it's not totally clear to me why that's kind of sustainable over the long term, that yields are so low, but they have always been low. Maybe it's a tax issue. Maybe people are collecting rent without paying all the tax on it. Maybe it's like a psychological thing of owning a property and managing it gives you a sense of purpose in your life. But anyway, the yields are definitely lower in residential than they are in industrial. And that's another reason why it hasn't happened. But I hope the follow-on offerings happen. I hope this is a success. I think that there is a demographic change, which is going on for a while in Mexico, as in the rest of the world, where young people no longer want to live with their parents, and if they have good jobs, they have means to rent. But not means to buy that. Well, they don't want to buy because their necessities are going to evolve very rapidly. So it doesn't make sense buying given the transaction costs. So I think, the rental market is, for demographic reasons and is likely to be quite strong in these places like Mexico City, Monterrey, Guadalajara, Querétaro, and they'll definitely kind of tap into that. And then having a kind of more encouraging a more mobile population that can go from place to place renting is a good thing for the labor market. So if companies like this get bigger and offer good quality apartments to young mobile workers, that's all good for Mexico overall. How do you see this?
No, I think you struck the right tone. I mean, not because it's a small IPO. We should put it down. On the contrary, it's great that we have new names coming to the market. Like we've always said, Mexico is a very small market. It needs more of this. I mean, little by little, this could become quite attractive and interesting. I mean, you like you said, Mexicans like to own certain property, distracts them. Well, this is a way to own property as well in the rental market in a much larger scale. Park Life wants to have follow-ons. I mean, they're trying to grow in the next 3 years to administer 1,000 houses or apartments. They plan to invest 3 billion pesos. So they want to move to cities like Cancun, Tijuana. So it seems like it's an interesting proposition. I think it's something that everybody should welcome, as it gives people the chance to invest in something different. And like you said, the demand for housing in this country, in Mexico, is tremendous. Young people are worried. Where are they going to find places to live? Prices are quite expensive. So if someone is dedicated to improving the conditions of houses that are available for different types of income, I think it has a lot of room to grow and be successful. So I think Park Life might be the first of others. The government has to understand how the market works so that it regulates it correctly, but not overburden it. I think capping rents is not necessarily the right way to go, but that's a big debate. It's all over the world. New York City is doing it. Now the Mexican government has done it. I think it generates a black market as well, and maybe you pay your rent outside of the legal system. Like you said, the possibilities of kicking people out of houses after they didn't pay the rent for 3 or 4 months should be quicker, faster, so that there is a guarantee that your property is getting the income that it should. All those things need to be carefully planned and carefully done. It's not a very simple thing to do. It's a big social issue. I mean, kicking people out on the streets it's always horrible. So, but there are ways to try to solve this issue with intelligence and with good regulation. So let's hope that this happens for the future, but very welcome to see another name in the Mexican Stock Exchange.
Two more quick points before we move on to the AWS interview. The Asociación Mexicana de Venta Online, AMVO, basically the e-commerce association, put out its annual report. There's a sort of concise version for the public available on their website. I thought there was quite a few interesting takeaways. I mean, total e-commerce retail value got to $55 billion, up about 19% percent over 2024. And now e-commerce or online sales represent 18% from 15% in 2024. So almost 1 in 5 pesos spent in Mexico is now spent online. And now Mexico is the eighth place in e-commerce penetration. And because the economy is not growing, and given that you had a 18% growth, 19% growth, we're growing 25 times the GDP growth, and 77 million Mexicans shopped online. There's only 130 million Mexicans, so maybe 30 million are sort of under the age of 15 or over the age of 80. So you get to, pretty much everyone is at some point is shopping online now. And it's a mobile first market. So most shopping is done through smartphones at this point. The millennials dominate, but Gen Z has already 30% of the market. And you're seeing very fast growth in people who traditionally haven't been very keen on e-commerce, which is the lower middle income segments and older people. Now, what you're seeing, according to the report, and this makes sense to me, is that you have the two giants, Mercado Libre and Amazon. Mercado Libre has been gaining a lot of share versus Amazon, and they dominate both direct sales, but above all, marketplace activity. And then you're seeing hundreds of thousands of individual sellers that are basically piggybacking off the fulfillment or the logistics of Mercado Libre and Amazon to sell through them. And a lot of them are not necessarily very formal. There were tax changes at the beginning of this year that intends to formalize them. So the marketplaces is what drives the e-commerce for them. And then you have below the two giants, the traditional retailers that are sort of omni-channel, which is Walmart, Coppel, Liverpool, and they are, growing their online business faster than their bricks and mortar business, but they aren't nearly as strong as, or not even present in marketplace activity, which is what drives this. And then, of course, you have the Chinese disruptors like Shein and Temu. They're continuing to grow, but they've been hit by changes in taxes. Basically, their products don't enter tax-free anymore under the so-called de minimis exception has been removed. And then obviously tariffs on Chinese goods have gone up. But notwithstanding that, there's still very significant players. And a lot of that hit, I assume they've taken to their own margins, because I occasionally buy on those sites and their prices are still very attractive. So a lot of people think that e-commerce is sort of formal. It's sort of buying stuff on Mercado Libre on Amazon, but actually e-commerce has allowed the informal sector, which we've talked about at the beginning of the podcast, to continue to flourish through these marketplaces. And now the government is sort of trying to clamp down a bit on that by forcing these sellers on the marketplaces to provide their RFSA and their CURP and all their tax ID stuff. So overall, it's great. Much better price discoverability online. Great for consumers, and it has been great for millions of sellers who have been able to piggyback off this massive infrastructure that Mercado Libre, above all, has built over the last decade in Mexico.
Yeah, very interesting numbers, Damien. I think the digitalization of the economy is moving up. These growth rates that you just mentioned are very impressive, due to the fact that Mexico didn't grow, or grew very little, 0.6 last year. So kudos to the companies that are providing not just their own platforms, but helping others get an extra income by selling through their marketplaces. I think Mercado Libre, as we have covered in this podcast, is doing a very interesting job, going head to head with a humongous competitor which is Amazon. So good for them. And this is the new way of doing things. The kids are on the phone all the time. We're on the phone all the time. Buying now on the phone, your ticket, your price, go to a stadium with your phone, you go to the airport with your phone. Now you buy your groceries with your phone, and why not, and so on and so forth. So I think it reflects reality, and it's a reality that is growing on upon us. Now we'll have to wait and see whether AI does our shopping later on in the future.
Yeah, that's probably for another podcast. There's a big discussion. But OpenAI or ChatGPT kind of basically pulled out of offering kind of e-commerce, saying it was more difficult than they thought. So I think that the AI in commerce can take a little bit more time. But what you have seen, and we're going to talk about this in the interview, is Amazon clearly has this huge AWS business that has been immensely successful, and meanwhile, Mercado Libre has this huge Mercado Pago business. So you've seen a difference driven by their origins and their geographical footprints. A slight difference in the overall strategy, with Mercado Libre really trying to grow its financial business in order, in part, to grow its e-commerce business, and Amazon, very focused clearly on e-commerce, but also got this massive and faster growing cloud and now data AI business. So just to finish, an end of an era. We've talked about it in the podcast, so I didn't want to let it go unmentioned. Nissan's CIVAC plant in Jutepec, Morelos, officially closed, very sadly, at the end of the March. It was Nissan's first factory outside Japan. It was opened in 1966, ran for 60 years and produced 6.5 million vehicles. And they announced that they were going to close it almost a year ago. And basically it's part of cutting costs. Nissan at a global level has run into some difficulties. It's now in fact run by a Mexican, so it's a bit ironic, I guess, that it took a Mexican to take the final decision to close down this factory, and they're moving most of the production to the plant in Aguascalientes. I think about 2,000 workers are going to be have lost their jobs as a result of this, and there presumably will be further job losses, or have been further job losses, as you see suppliers also no longer being able to sell to them. Now, we mentioned in the previous podcast that there was apparent interest from Chinese car companies in buying the factory. It's apparently about 40 hectares, so it's pretty big. And there's talk about Hongqi or Photon, BYD, SAIC, the usual Chinese names. But nothing, as far as I can tell, has come of that. And it may have just been the Minister of Development of Morelos State saying that Chinese were interested without the Chinese actually being interested. But hopefully something will come of it. But I can't see any announcements or even any kind of strong rumors that someone else is gonna go there. Morelos is, these days at least, is not a significant industrial hub. The Bajío region, Puebla, have become much sort of stronger areas for car production. It was a bit of the last 2 decades, having a big car plant in Cuernavaca was a bit of an outlier. Have you ever been to the plant, Eduardo?
No, Damien, I drove by it many times. I mean, that part of Cuernavaca was known as CIVAC because that's where the plant was built. Back in my youth, there was not a lot of things in that part of the city. Now it's completely engulfed by Cuernavaca. It's the end of an era, as you said. I think it's one of the oldest plants built in Mexico, without a doubt. Not the oldest, but one of the oldest. It's interesting that Nissan couldn't refurbish it to adapt it to a much more modern type of factory to produce cars. But that's the way it is. And like you said, it's part of the whole restructuring of the company on its own. We had hoped that it might be purchased by someone, but no one has come up. So I wonder what that real estate will turn out to be. Remember, we even have a General Motors plant in Mexico City, which is now part of Nuevo Polanco. Maybe that will be what happened in Cuernavaca with this large piece of land. And like I said, it's part of the city without any doubt now. So
maybe Park Life will buy it and turn it into small apartments for millennials and Gen Zs with gymnasiums and paddle tennis courts included.
They should hire us for consulting. But anyway, goodbye, CIVAC.
Terrific. Let's move on to our interview. Today we're joined by Ruben Mugartegui. Ruben is the country manager of Amazon Web Services in Mexico, AWS, Mexico. He's led AWS for 3 or 4 years now, and under his watch, AWS launched its first infrastructure region in the country last year, part of a broader plan to invest more than $5 billion in Mexico over the coming decade or so. Ruben, how are you today?
Damian, thank you so much for having me. Very well. Appreciate the time, and very happy to be with you today to share some of the information that you want to share with your audience.
Terrific. Well, AWS just turned 20. Looking at Mexico today, what, in your view, has the cloud fundamentally changed for Mexican companies over these 2 decades? And where do you think Mexico hasn't yet fully captured the benefits of that shift?
Absolutely. Well, you started by saying 20 years, and I think it's very important, that word, because in fact, 20 years ago, we changed, AWS, it changed how the world powers innovation today. And let me go back first, before answering your question about Mexico, that is very important as well, to reflect a little bit about these 20 years of innovation. And actually it's important because March, this month, it's March the 31st today, but March 2026 marks the 20th anniversary of the launch and the formal founding of Amazon Web Services. So basically, Damian, 20 years ago, Amazon created this cloud computing unit under the name of AWS, that's the way we call it. But the way or the objective was to transform the typical IT from physical infrastructure into a non-demand utility, right? So instead of companies or you and I buying servers or computers to run businesses, the new model is now to basically consume those resources the same way you and I consume electricity or the way we pay our phone bill. So we call this model the pay-as-you-go because we do not worry about physical space, infrastructure updates, or any type of maintenance. And to be honest, reflecting on these 20 years, this innovation really democratized the access to computing power. All of a sudden, anyone with an internet connection can access to the same powerful technology than the world's largest companies used to innovate. Think about NASA, for example, right? Now, any small business or a startup can use exactly the same technology as them. Or think about Netflix, for example. It completely changed movie nights and how we consume content around the world. Or consider how we listen to music through streaming platforms, or actually the platform that we're using today runs entirely on AWS, that is obviously cloud computer. So it's interesting to see how things that were 20 years ago, maybe science fiction, now are part of our natural world. Today we can order a car with just a few taps on our phone, but we also can think about critical moments such as the pandemic, when we relied on Zoom to stay connected, teachers kept classrooms running through video conferences, business continued operating remotely, and families stayed obviously in touch across distances. But also, Damian, there are things that few people know. For example, cloud computing played a crucial role in developing COVID-19 vaccines. Companies such as AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, all of them use AWS cloud services to accelerate the vaccine development. So it opened, a world of possibilities that basically reshaped every industry. And now, literally, millions of customers have redesigned the way the world works. So that's what really had happened throughout the 20 last years. Now, you asked me about Mexico. And, Mexico in AWS has been terrific because we had or celebrated in 2025 a decade of driving innovation in the country. It was, I would say, one of the largest, not the largest, it was one of the best years that we had in Mexico, but also alongside with one of the largest technology investments that the country has received in the last years. You started by saying that we invested $5 billion, and that's true. we put actually in Mexico our region in Querétaro into operations. And the way we call our cluster of 3 data centers technically is what we say a region, right? So when I call a region, I mean the 3 data centers that all have been built and are operated end-to-end by AWS. So this was a part of what we did in 2025. And I think 2025 with this investment consolidated our long-term commitment to the country by positioning, Mexico not only as a country that is innovating with the cloud, but also as a technology hub for Latin America. And we just celebrated 1 year after, the launch of our region. It's impressive the way small business, startups, huge and large companies are already operating in our region. Of course, taking advantage of the low latency, greater availability, prices in local currency, and also local and data residency. So it's a very important moment that 2025 was for us in AWS, Demian.
And how does Mexico compare to other countries in Latin America or the United States, for that matter, in the adoption of cloud? Was it slower here, in line, faster? And what more needs to be done from your perspective?
Look, I don't think, it's a fact that Mexican businesses are using and building their future on the cloud. Actually, 58% of the applications in Mexico already operate in the cloud. So this figure is big, and it's actually projected to increase by 75% by the end of 2026. So I would say we are growing in a very interesting way. Mexico definitely started in a different pace when the cloud was born. But now, like I would say the last 3 to 4 years, the pace of adoption has been unproportional in Mexico. And actually, 96% of the Mexican organizations, due to the studies that we do with our analysts, etc., are going to increase their IT budget this year in 2026. Obviously, artificial intelligence is pushing them a lot in terms of, adoption. In comparison to other countries, I would say first in Latin America, we are definitely leading alongside with Brazil. But I would say also that maybe the friction that we're having has to do more with regulations in some sort of industries. For example, the financial industry, where, the adoption of cloud is not blocked, but is not necessarily as quick as the industry would like to see. Let me give you an example. While in other countries across the world, you have regulations where you basically put a lot of, things to be certified and supervised, and a lot of documentation that takes you maybe 1 or 2 years. But when those things are certified by the regulator, you are good to go. You can basically do whatever you want with the cloud. And think about Itaú, for example, that is the biggest bank in Latin America that is basically migrating 100% of its infrastructure to Amazon Web Services. Mexico, instead, the regulator asks that each workload needs to be supervised and certified. So if you want just to change something in your application, or you want to migrate a database, or you want to do small things, every workload needs to pass through a supervision and authorization to the regulator. And that is not necessarily helping in terms of speed of adoption to this industry that, it's the one that creates inertia to the other ones. Financial industry is very big, is the one that, is complex. It needs or requires a lot of security. It's also expensive. So whenever you move a bank, other industries followed. And in Mexico, we unfortunately have been somehow challenged by the speed of the regulations to do this type of adoption. I would say, Damian, that is what is missing in our country to keep, evolving as we would like to.
And you mentioned, Ruben, AI. How are you seeing AI adoption in Mexico at the enterprise level in Mexico? Are you seeing it similar to Brazil and the US, or are we, as I've heard from different people, a little bit behind those two countries?
So I started by saying, what happened the first 20 20 years with cloud, no? And now, with AI, Amazon Web Services is really building the foundation for the next 20 years of innovation and beyond. And let me start by telling you this. Generative AI, which is really the term that has been democratizing this usage of AI. We simplify and we say AI, but it's really the generation of artificial intelligence by putting prompts, and now agentic AI. I think that it represents, the next transformation of that magnitude. And I actually think that it's going to be bigger and bolder than what we just have seen the last 20 years. Now, in terms of Mexico, in the last year, in 2024, more than 495,000 organizations began using artificial intelligence in Mexico. And just for you to, and the audience to understand better, that is equivalent to one business adopting this technology every minute, okay? And this is not necessarily different than what is going on in Brazil or around the world. Actually, if you put it in perspective for Mexico, this means that 38% of companies that we have in Mexico have adopted AI, right? And or this could be also translated into more or less 2 million companies, equivalent to 1/3 of all organizations in Mexico. And we have seen or started to see in all of these companies very interesting facts. First of all, 83% of these more than 2 million companies that have already adopted AI have increased their revenue. We got a study that says that at least 16% on average, these companies have increased their revenue by using AI, and 88% of them also experience significant improvements in terms of productivity. Now, the real challenge in Mexico specifically has to do with the usage of advanced AI. I would say that, of these more than 2 million companies that have adopted AI, only 7% of them have done this in a very advanced way. And most of them are the startups that are, digital native companies that understand fully how to use these technologies in a way that is not just a return to the employee, which is productivity, but really to disrupt the market or to change things that really are, conquering new ways of doing work or lives. And but most of them, 70% of them, are really doing it in a very basic way, like mostly translating documents or, summarizing emails or generating images to try to be more effective in some sort of, marketing campaigns. So I would say that that's the real challenge that we have now. And what we really want to do is to help specifically the companies and enterprise to really measure the return on investment of this and evolve from basic usage to really advance usage of AI to impact in their industries, Damian.
As far as I understand, the servers for AI are quite different from cloud computing. They require much more investment, much more capacity, and they're more sophisticated. Are you guys going to invest in bringing those type of servers to Mexico?
We already did. Our data centers here in Mexico, the 3 data centers that we have already operating in Querétaro, all of them have our, processors and the capacity to use AI in the country. So today you can get into AWS console and start deploying AI through our platform. We call it Bedrock, and you can choose to be deployed in Mexico. And that is available today. So the short answer is yes. And what we are really starting to push more in Mexico has to do with this agentic mindset, that is going to be really the way to change everything. We think that, AI agents, and let me, for those who don't know exactly what is an agent, it's basically a software. It's still a software, but that independently decides what actions to take to achieve human set goals. So I think that we are entering a new age of technological coexistence where for the first time, humans and agents will coexist. So as I was, telling about Netflix, we are unable to predict what is going to happen the next 20 years with this, but we know that when you put frontier technology, and in this case in Querétaro, is already available in the hands of Mexicans or millions of Latin American builders, extraordinary things happen. And let me give you an example of something that is very interesting that is happening as of today in Mexico with Grupo Ángeles, using AI in our data centers in Querétaro. So Hospitales Ángeles is now redefining how health checkups work today. We all know that checkups have been in our lives, for several years now. But now you can go and visit a clinic in Grupo Ángeles. It could be a hospital or a clinic that they have, and get a comprehensive checkup where AI helps to map more than 10,000 images of your organs in just 3 hours. This is something that was basically impossible to do before AI due to first cost, human labor, and the time to produce. And obviously, you wouldn't put this as a product because it could be obviously impossible to pay. So today with the generative AI, where you map all these 10,000 of images of your organs in 3D, results can then be viewed through this augmented reality, by using special meta goggles, for example. So the doctor and you are in the hospital, and then you are interpreting your results, allowing to see your body and compare it to what a normal person of your age needs to be at that stage in 3D for sure. But most importantly, this technology, and thanks to the AI that is already in Querétaro, can detect illnesses more than 3 years earlier than the traditional checkups. Actually, when we started with the pilot of this important project, we managed to produce 180 tests with patients that were taking the normal or the traditional checkup and also this new one. And in 100% of the cases, 100%, we could detect things that were unable to be, catch in the traditional checkup. So that is really what is happening when you use artificial intelligence in an advanced way. This early detection could literally save lives. And this is happening in Mexico. This is happening in a Mexican conglomerate, which is Grupo Basol with Grupo Ángeles, and is consuming artificial intelligence from our data centers in Querétaro, Eduardo.
Two things come up to mind by hearing you, Ruben. So you know which companies are actually implementing AI systems. Can you tell, you just mentioned Grupo Ángeles, it's a health service company. What other companies, industries are you seeing evolving into the AI ecosystem? And the other question, I think you referred to it a little bit, but how much does AWS get involved in designing the AI, or are you just a service provider?
Absolutely. Look, we have seen customers across all industries. That's a fact. From public sector to, financial services industry, CPG and retail, telco, media and entertainment, obviously our startups, and also the small and medium business. But let me give you some examples. Mexico, CIVAC, for example, is a very interesting customer that has enabled, a lot of agents to produce efficiency in what they do and enable more people without traditional credit history to finance cars. Bitso is also one that is, including AI to keep regulating the crypto services in Mexico and the region, serving millions of users. Sky Alert, for example, is another interesting customer that now with artificial intelligence and agents is trying to more than predict, to help people how to act and make decisions in seconds to save lives. And we're now, thinking about how can we expand this type of solutions, not only by using an application, but also by consuming Alexa, for example, right? That it's basically immersed in different speakers, etc. But so imagine that you get the seismic alert or the earthquake alert in your house, but also giving you recommendation based on your location, based on your behaviors, on what to do depending on the type of the earthquake or the magnitude of the earthquake. We're seeing also a lot of important companies such as BBVA migrating, for example, their whole data platform, enhancing it with artificial intelligence to make better decisions for their consumers daily. I could keep going, but basically we're seeing a lot of companies in Mexico already being, active in this. And what we are doing with them, addressing your second question, Damian, Eduardo, is we are helping them to understand which are the correct use cases to invest. Because, what I have seen personally throughout these 3 years, I would say, or 3 or 2 to 4 years, I would say, in terms of artificial intelligence in Mexico, is that, 2023 and 2024, everybody was trying to understand if this was really secure, right? What was this? If they need to be experts in terms of prompt engineering. And the first thing that I saw in Mexico, mostly with CIOs, was that they were blocking the usage of artificial intelligence within their companies, right? And it was not necessarily a bad decision in terms of thinking like, hey, I'm seeing my employees submitting in ChatGPT, let's say, confidential information, or trying to translating documents that are confidential, and maybe training the model to know what the company doesn't want to disclose or didn't want to disclose. So there was a lot of safetiness concern, if I may call it like that was happening in 2022 and 2024. Now, to be honest, when you put that barrier into your company, you and I can just get the phone, take a picture of the same document, put it in ChatGPT, and that's pretty much it. You can do exactly the same. So whenever you block something in the company, the employees will try to figure out and work around. So we started to help these companies to understand how to deploy artificial intelligence in a secure way within their companies, putting the correct guardrails, understanding that they could choose different models to interact between them. If they needed OpenAI, but also Anthropic or Meta, Llama, how can they have a hub? We have this solution that we call Bedrock, where you basically can choose whatever foundational model you need, or could also interact between each of them, but everything within a virtual private network that could take advantage of the model itself, that it's already very intelligent, but start, growing that model with your own data within your virtual private network and not exposing that outside of the company. So I would say that was 2023 and 2024 advisory that we have given to the companies. 2025 was more about, the year of production. Most of these companies I already told you, and some of them I cannot disclose because we're not allowed to, but they were more about, how can I now lower my cost? I understand that this is valuable. I need to be there. Some of them were more because of the fear of missing out. Some of the others were because, the board was putting pressure on the CEO saying, hey, what are you doing with AI? And the CEO basically doesn't know exactly what to do. So they are trying to push or to put pressure, in the IT department to do something, but it's more about, the fear of missing out or of not being the Kodak or the Blockbuster of the past. But whenever they started to do something without advisory, what we started to see is a lot of cost. Let me give you an example of an SMB, a small medium business in Mexico that had an invoice of around, $4,000 per month with us. All of a sudden, they started to invoice $2.5 million a month. And whenever that happens, I get an alert here in my office, and we dive deep and see what happened. And usually it is someone is mining, right? Cryptocurrencies, or there was a hacking. So I asked for the information, and we called this person. It was an SMB, a small company. And the person that was managing this admitted that he was really playing with artificial intelligence within Amazon, and that he did not know how to manage everything, and he was unable to pay for sure. But that was happening in the last year. Like, if you do not advise and go alongside with the companies on how to architect correctly, from the usage of correct processors or chips, and also the architecture and the correct foundational model, it could be a nightmare. And a real nightmare. And now what we're seeing, transitioning from 2025 to 2026, is more agents, for sure. Everybody's talking about agents and they don't even know exactly how to cook them, but mostly about return on investment. I would say. There's this huge discrepancy on what the CEO wants as a strategic business priority and what the CIO has in its top of his mind. So for example, the CEO first priority is revenue growth. That's a fact, right? And when you go to the CIO thinks about AI in terms of productivity. And the CEO sees productivity obviously as a priority, but it's not the first one. It might be the 10th one. So the discrepancy of the CEO wanting revenue growth by investing in AI and not seeing that clearly applied in the P&L is what is happening right now. So what we're trying to help these companies is to really understand which are the correct business use cases that they need to choose to see if it's going to be a strategy for productivity. I call this a strategy to defend. I mean, if you have the fear of missing out, you don't want to be the Kodak or the Blockbuster of the past, or you have limited staff, or you are an SMB, well, you better start using AI to help your employees to be more productive. Like, for emails, translation, obviously marketing campaigns with images, but that's going to be a return on the employee. And it's going to be almost impossible, and we could argue here with CFOs, to measure in a financial statement. It's important and it's going to help definitely the company. But if you want to measure that from a financial statement perspective, it's going to be almost impossible. And that's the contradictory thing that is happening. Now, if you really want to measure return on investment from an AI perspective, you need to think about and extend, a strategy. What I described to you guys from Grupo Ángeles is really something that can be measured end-to-end from an ROI. It's an existing process. Checkups have been there for a while. They manage end-to-end the process. They have experience. They might be the leaders of the market for this type of processes. But with the new technology and capabilities that we have, they can now extend it or really change the course of it to do something that was not able to be exposed to the customers before. Actually, the name of this solution of Grupo Ángeles is Aisha. And the reason they put this name is because they saw great usage and adoption of it, and they made a spin-off that is now a different business that they are selling to different clinics or hospitals now in Europe. And this is clearly a way to measure return on investment, right? So that's what we are trying to help companies to really understand, extend business use cases to really measure the ROI on their P&L. And then you also have obviously a third part that could be the disruptive way of thinking. If you want to be the Spotify of the future, the Netflix of the future, obviously you can put a lot of your eggs in a basket where you, for 70% of chances, don't know if it's going to be successful or not. But it's more when you are maybe a startup or when you are a company that is in the research and development thing, for example, in the health for cancer, or maybe blood transfusions, or trying to generate new business cases for the new way of creating a car, for example. So those are, for me, the three business cases that we're trying to help the companies. How to defend if you have a limited staff or the fear of missing out, how to extend and measure the ROI of something that you know end-to-end perfectly, or how to disrupt the market if you want to put something that is going to change a huge industry.
Ruben, one final from me. As you know, in the US, the economy is growing, and some think that it's growing thanks to the investment in AI and in all these new technologies. Could you extrapolate that to Mexico? Mexico is not growing that much, but is AI helping Mexico grow?
100% yes. I would say, it's very difficult to understand, and these type of companies that are investing billions of dollars. Amazon Web Services is investing, Amazon as a whole is investing 200 billions of CapEx, right? And if I'm not mistaken, it's actually the biggest investment in the technological era. And nobody understands why and how will this turn out in terms of a payoff. But this also already happened with Amazon 24 years ago. It took Amazon 16 years to be profitable, and nobody understood why were we not basically hitting the market with the earning calls and the expectations of the stakeholders. And now you see that Amazon retail is part of our lives. And due to Amazon business, AWS was born. So what we think, Eduardo, is that many things that are unpredictable today are gonna really change the course of our lives. I really think that this is the new industrial revolution. I personally think that cancer, illness, is gonna be cured with the usage of artificial intelligence. And we're seeing interesting things happening, not only in the US, but in Mexico. Christus Muguerza hospitals, for example, are now implementing an AI system where they can basically give you a treatment for cancer, depending on which cancer do you have for sure, that is more than 90% associated to what you really need. So usually when you have this type of illness, you go and you have different treatments that sometimes are very nocive to your health and very difficult to address. And the doctor is trying to do an A/B testing to see what is the best one that your body will basically take in a better way. With artificial intelligence and with all the data alongside with your DNA that could be interpreted in a different way, and not exposing private information, because all of this data is data that is not from real patients. This is basically simulated data, but that could be very, very similar to what is happening in real patients. The patients could now, or the doctors could now tell the patient, hey, based on what you have, the way your body behaves, your DNA, and what you are basically experiencing, this treatment is going to be 90 or more than 90% the one that is going to act better for your illness, right? And that's amazing. I mean, you are not necessarily curing cancer, but you are addressing cancer in a way that it was impossible to do months ago, not even years, months ago. So this is happening in Mexico as well. So absolutely it's accelerating the way of thinking, the way of doing things, Eduardo. And this is why I'm super proud of being, humble and honored to be part of AWS, because we're helping Mexico and Latin America to become really a tech innovator hub.
Ruben, a couple of final questions from me as well. For all of this to happen, we obviously need data centers. How worried are you about infrastructure constraints to building data centers in Mexico, namely power constraints, water constraints, talent, regulatory constraints? How big a deal is it when you deploy your CapEx to build data centers here? And then secondly, does it actually matter that much? Can Mexico just hook up to data centers in Virginia or Arizona or Texas, or do we actually need our own data centers?
All of those good questions. Let me start first by saying that those are definitely things that we need to think about in advance. So for energy first, I mean, to open 3 data centers, we had a lot of relationship with the government 5 years ahead of time of opening data centers. So it's not an easy thing to deal with. But when we announce something at Amazon, it's because it is, up and running 100% as it should be, right? So now our 3 data centers are energized as they need to be, and we have clear expansion projects already being assessed to make them, feasible. From a sustainability perspective, look, at Amazon, we have this firm commitment to contributing to a more sustainable future. This is why we invest, not only in AWS, but across all of our business units. From an AWS regional standpoint, Mexico and Querétaro region was designed and built with the most advanced technology to operate efficiently and responsible with this environment. Actually, this infrastructure does not use water for the cooling process. We knew and know that Querétaro is a state where, lacks of water. And we didn't want to, impact the community by building these data centers. And actually, by not using water for the cooling process, bring us also closer to our goal of being water positive across our operations around the world, which includes data centers. And this objective is by 2030. Now, what being water positive means? So basically, it means that we will return more water to communities than we use. And for you to have an idea, in our data centers, we have this loop channel that basically reuses and recycles the water that can be used for maybe 40 years. So it's a small amount of water that really we use. Imagine around 12 pipes of water that could be used for 40 years in the future. So that's the way we are, working in this type of projects in Mexico. So we have planned for the next 15 years already, okay? So the impact for our data centers today are being designed for the next 15 years. Now, technology changes every day. With artificial intelligence, everything is being in a thus proportional way. So we're working very close to the government to see how can we keep, evolving with these needs. But again, I wouldn't say it's a problem for us because this has been already treated and studied 5 years before starting this project in Mexico. Now, in terms of deploying data centers in Mexico or not, it depends in terms of, the industries. When you look, for example, at the financial services industries, it is very important to have infrastructure in Mexico because at the end of the day, you want your data within the country. And actually, the regulators, they do not force you, but they recommend you to have your data here. And also, they ask you for a golden copy within the country. And with this, we can definitely solve this. Now, public sector is another important, a sector, allow me to be redundant, where definitely having data sovereignty is basically important, right? We are operating in 21 out of the 31 states across the country, and all of them were asking us for a lot of time to deploy data centers in Mexico to keep growing with the pace that they wanted, because that's something that they really need, deployment in the country to be more secure, but also more reliable and with better certainty that the data is residing within the country. Telco, media, and entertainment. If you want to stream something, if you want to connect telecommunications, data latency, it's important. So it's not the same to connect to Dallas or to San Antonio that having things here in Mexico from different, perspectives. Security first, data latency as well for sure, and obviously the fact that you have data residency as well. So yes, and also the fact that Central America and I would say some part of South America, it's also being benefited by this deployment because a lot of businesses that were connecting to Virginia directly now can be connected to Mexico and, take advantage of all of these things that I just described. Think about, for example, Nubank, right? Nubank runs entirely on AWS, and Nubank was deploying most of the things either in Virginia or Sao Paulo. The operation in Mexico is huge, and it's becoming day by day more important. Now they can take advantage of Mexico, not only from a regulatory perspective, but also being a, international company. They are becoming an international company, actually operating also in the US, that is taking advantage of all of these things for Colombia, for Brazil, for Mexico, for the US. So that's the real meaning when I say that Mexico is becoming a tech hub internationally. Games or video games. Mexico is one of the countries that adopts or play video games more than any other country worldwide. I think it's the second one, if I'm not mistaken, that is a gamer country, if I will. It's not the production of video games, but gamers. Electronic Arts, for example, uses a lot of the Mexican infrastructure to drive all of these video games through apps or through, the consoles due to the latency. The response that you need in video games, it needs to be basically at the millisecond, or the player abandons the game. So that is happening as we speak with the infrastructure that we have deployed in Querétaro, and you can think about many other, use cases that we have across the world.
Ruben, thank you so much for that. I could go on for many more hours, and congratulations on your 20 years, and look forward very much as a AWS user, as most of Mexico is, most of the world is, look very much to the next 20 years.
Thank you so much, Damian. Thank you, Eduardo. Appreciate the time, and hope we can together keep changing Mexico.
So that's it for this week's MexMove podcast. Thanks everyone for listening. Please review us, share us, and we hope to have you back next week.